Hello and welcome back. Today we're building the 143rd Jaguar XJS from Hella. So the car is fairly well moulded, all in green plastic. Just decided to deepen some of the panel lines using this Tamiya panel scriber. There's then a few pieces that need to be removed, like these support parts from the back. And to make sure to sand it down and remove any panel lines. Be very careful removing this piece from the front. Try to smooth it out as best as possible. I'm building this to replicate the 1984 European Touring Car Championship winner, shown here at the British Motor Museum. Starting by priming it in some fine light grey primer from Tamiya. And here you can see it primed. Now I then painted it in some green, deep green XF26 from Tamiya. I think if I was to do this again, I probably would have done the white stripes first, because it will later take a long time to add those. Paint went down really well with my Galeri Swallowtail. Now then, once that had cured, I masked off the areas along the sides for the white stripes, but as I said, this took a really long time. In fact, it took 10 light coats of Tamiya LP2 white to build it up to a decent consistency. But here it is when it's finished, and I was pretty happy with how it looked. This being gloss paint, it stood out very clearly against the matte green. There we have it. Now, before adding the decals, I wanted to give it a light clear coat so that the consistency was all the same. So this is a little bit of LP9 clear gloss from Tamiya. Looking at the real example here, there weren't too many changes. However, the front bumper, which you can see here, did need to have these large sections removed from the front. So that was something I did here, and then sanded that down. This was all painted in satin black, and then I masked off the lower bit of the bumper and did the radiator grille and the headlight surrounds in this Vallejo chrome silver. Really like how that looks. And you can see how well it fits here. Generally speaking, the fitment in this kit was pretty good, especially considering this car is such a small scale. Now then, there are indicators at the front, so I painted those on the inside with a little bit of silver Posca paint pen. And then the indicators I'd coloured with an orange Sharpie, and I pushed them into place, gluing them down with a small amount of white glue. There we have it. Now the interior tub is obviously from the road car, but I wanted to add as little detail as possible. Just added the door cards like so, gluing them in place with some Tamiya Extra Thin. The opening for the gear stick wasn't quite wide enough, so I drilled that a little bit here to make it just a little larger. Now the kit does have a very rudimentary engine, which is strange because once you put it in, you will never see it again. Hella did release a race car version of this kit, but I don't have it, so I'm going to make up the decals shown here using some spares and some additional ones. Here's the spares from the XJR9, which I didn't use, and here's some additional ones printed onto clear decal paper. Now for the pinstripe that goes along the bottom of the white stripes down the side of the car, I decided to use some of this black line decal which goes along the outside of these ones. Pretty happy with that. And then for the boxes for the numbers to go in, I found some spare white decal left over from a previous Ferrari F1 kit. Cut these into 0.9 centimetre squares and trimmed the corners to make them curved. Should use a little bit of micro set to help secure those. Then got Tom Walkinshaw and Wyn Percy's names, along with that little British flag to go just in front of the door. There we are. And I'm using this Jaguar lettering here on the door. It's not quite as long as the real one would be, but it's pretty good. Unfortunately, I don't have a white leaping cat, so I'm just going to have to leave that off. Printed my own number 1 for the side. And I found that this Jaguar decal was a bit short, but thankfully I found a much longer one in the spares box. And this suits the bonnet much better. Got an electrical cutoff and fire extinguisher decal here, used the smallest one possible. And then added the number 1 to the front as well. There we are, pretty happy with that. Now the interior was all painted in satin black, and the seat here done in orange. I know it's not a proper race seat, and also the car itself would have been right-hand drive, but I felt that this was a decent enough approximation for such a small kit. I coloured some masking tape in black and cut that to very thin strips to be the seat belts, and then added a bit more of that silver Posca paint pen to add the buckles. There we are, pretty happy with that. And then just putting in the driver's side seat. As I said, the real car would have been right-hand drive, but never mind. Now time for the dashboard, also all painted in black with a couple of small details picked out using some clear gloss. Now I gave the bodywork 3 coats of LP9, including this rear section here. That was then wet sanded using some Tamiya 3000 grit sanding sponges, and now I'm using their polishing compounds to smooth out the finish as best as possible. I'm using these polishing sponges as well to try and help be as careful as possible. I'm not going to be able to give this a perfect finish, being such a small scale. It's quite difficult to polish at this level. I'm just using a paintbrush and cotton bud to remove some of the residue, and then an empty airbrush to blow it away. It's a bit better. I'll keep going to see if I can make it even better than this. Now on the bodywork itself, I masked off the roofline and then hand brushed the rubbers in semi-gloss black from Tamiya. This had been thinned ever so lightly with their lacquer thinner to help it just flow that little bit more easily. I also made sure to paint the vent on the bonnet. On some of the real cars, these details around the windows are chrome, but on the racing one it's mainly black rubber, and I'll add some chrome accents to it later on. There we are, not bad. I did the door handles in Posca paint pen, but later added some chrome tape over the top as I just felt it looked better. The undercarriage was painted black, then masked off, painted green. That was then clear coated, and then I added some decals to that along the side, little sponsor decals, and that was all clear coated again. I would then need to mask off the rear bumper, and that was painted chrome. Now the window here needs to have the rear surround painted in a semi-gloss black, so I masked that off. This was done using Revell acrylics, which chip off quite easily if you get any bleed. Once the rear bumper was painted chrome, I then added the black rubber bumper underneath that. However, on the real car this is supposed to extend all the way along to the wheels, as you can see here. So I cut out some small pieces of styrene card, painted those black, and glued them into place to extend the bumper around underneath the chrome one. Here you can see it just used a little bit of white PVA glue so as to not damage any of the paintwork. I'll add some Dunlop decals to that later on. Now I'm using some chrome tape. This is leftover from an Aoshima kit. And I'll use some of this to create the chrome surround on some of the window surrounds. There you are. Also did this on the door handles. Now adding the front and rear axles. These are all exactly the same on this kit, so no worries about which one goes where. There we are. Now time to add the simple interior. I did think about adding a roll cage, but at this small size I'm not sure you would have seen it. Now the wheels are made up of three parts. You've got the two sides of the tyres which sandwich together, and then they were painted matte black. And then I added the hubs, which had been painted in chrome silver. These aren't 100% accurate for the race car wheels, but I think that they are a close enough approximation. All four are identical, so no worries about which one goes where. I used black panel liner on the radiator to pick out some detail, and then added a small black triangle for the badge. Then the headlights needed to be sanded ever so slightly to fit in as best as possible, and were glued into place using some more white glue. Here I picked out the rear view mirror and the windscreen wipers using some black Sharpie. And that was glued into the middle using a very, very, very small amount of super glue. Now then, the rear boot goes above that. It's important to put the window in first. Now the engine has been painted black with a couple of silver details, and then you've got the intakes, which I put on either side in a little bit of silver. Jaguar V12. that made this car the most powerful in the European Touring Car Championship. Now that goes in here just above the axle, however I chose just to leave it out because I'd never see it again. Now for the boot cover thing at the back, you've got the raised XJS decal label on one side, which I picked out using some silver paint pen. I also painted the inside of the tail lights silver on both sides. Just a test fit here, clip that around. The fitment is generally pretty good in this kit. You've then got a small clear part which goes on the back here. It was painted silver on the reverse, and there'll be a decal that goes on top of that later. I then used a small amount of thin cement to secure that onto the rest of the boot. This is very, very fiddly, and you may even want to do this before painting. I'll leave that there. Tail lights painted in orange, silver and red. I also went around the outside with a bit of the silver pen to add the chrome trim that's on the real ones, and glued those into place using some more white glue. The boot has a very thin silver trim at the bottom of it, so I cut out a very thin strip of silver from this spare Aoshima kit. Side windows glued into place using some white glue. These needed to be sanded down a little bit to make the fitment a bit better. Again, putting it all together now that the windows are all in place. I used these curved tweezers just to prise away the bodywork on this side. And then a test fit with the front headlights. Pretty happy with that. I cut out these small circular bits of silver foil using this hole puncher to replicate those circles on the boot. I'm not quite sure what those are supposed to be, but if you do know, let me know down below. Jaguar decal on the boot lid here, and then using a bit of white decal to start with, I then added a transparent home printed TWR Jaguar decal for the sun strip. Then used a bit of micro set to help that settle down as best as possible. There are a few decals to go on the front lip here. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough of the TWR decals, so I put them in the most prominent places, including another one here on the boot lid at the back. Now it was time for the final fitment. Made sure to put a little bit of thin cement in just below where the sides of the bodywork meet. Then used a bit of cement at the top of these headlights, which glued into the underside of the bonnet. I then decided to build my own wing mirrors. This is a small amount of jeweler's wire, which I attached onto the bottom of a blocky piece of styrene, coloured black and then chrome on the other side, drilled a small hole in the doors, and then super glued them into place once I was happy, which looks pretty good if you ask me. And there we are, it's finished. I really enjoyed building this. I do have a bit of a soft spot for these 1/43rd helikits. They're not perfect, but I think this is a pretty good representation of the Jaguar XJS Touring Car Championship winner in its 40th anniversary year. and it turns out that April 2024 was TWR month because here's my 2 Jaguar TWR cars. Thanks a lot for watching, as always. Leave a comment down below, subscribe if you haven't done so already, hit the bell, all those things, and I'll see you soon.